how does a nation whose navy has basically been reduced to what is literally described as a handful of Boston whalers, how do they still pose an imminent nuclear threat to a global superpower?
I mean, it's a massive paradox, right?
Right. And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. So for you listening,
Yeah.
whether you're, prepping for a political science seminar or just trying to survive the daily news cycle without losing your mind.
Which is hard enough to do these
Well,
days.
absolutely. But trying to understand global politics right now is honestly, it's like looking at a massive chessboard where half the pieces are on fire and the other half are, I don't know, just completely changing the rules.
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate way to put it, actually.
Well, today we actually have a map. We are taking a deep dive into this sweeping, incredibly intense, and highly detailed press briefing from a senior U.S. administration official.
And it really spans the globe, from the Middle East and Ukraine right over to the Indo-Pacific and even America's own hemisphere.
Exactly. Our mission is to connect all these dots and figure out the grand strategy driving these moves. But before we do that, I need to lay down a really quick mandatory disclaimer.
Right, very important to state up front.
Yeah. So the source material we are looking at today contains some highly politically charged statements. It talks about international conflicts, adversarial leaders, and U.S. domestic politics.
Very pointed statements, I would add.
Right. So we want to be crystal clear. This deep dive takes absolutely no sides. We're not endorsing any left-wing or, right-wing viewpoints.
Exactly. Our only goal is to impartially decode the strategic worldview exactly as it was laid out in the text. We're just looking at the blueprints.
Perfect. Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with the most explosive area of the briefing, which is the Middle East. The U.S. strategy here is, well, they are totally shifting how they handle deterrence with Iran.
They really are. Usually, diplomatic doctrine is all about, proportional response, an eye for an eye.
Right, but the text explicitly rejects that. The new doctrine is defined as a head for an eye.
Which is such an intentional phrase. It represents this doctrine of overwhelming, disproportionate deterrence. And the argument is based on a 20-year timeline of Iranian military development.
20 years. So what exactly have they been building?
Well, according to the briefing, they've spent 2 decades building up this massive arsenal of short-range missiles, rockets, drones, all of it. And the intent was to double that stockpile to use it as a conventional shield.
A shield, so like a deterrent so no one can touch them.
Exactly. If they could build a threat large enough to overwhelm U.S. or allied air defenses, they could safely hide behind it. And then eventually develop a nuclear weapon behind that shield.
Wow. Okay, so the U.S. strategy now is basically trying to smash that shield to pieces before the nuclear payload is finished.
Right, and the text claims this dismantling is well underway. I mean, it paints a picture of an Iranian military facing just complete systemic collapse.
Yeah, the details were wild. They are reportedly losing launchers and radars nightly. Their air defenses are crushed. And then there's that vivid detail about the Navy reduced to a handful of Boston whalers.
Yeah, the Boston Whalers comment. It's meant to project total U.S. military dominance. But ironically, despite this decimation, Iran is actually begging for a deal.
Wait, they are? Like, through back channels?
Yes, through third countries. They're trying to negotiate a stop to the bleeding, basically.
But the U.S. is just totally ignoring them. Right. Because the logic in the briefing is that Iran has this history of immediately breaking deals.
Or trying to rewrite the terms the exact second a deal is signed. Yeah.
It's like playing a board game with someone who demands to change the rules immediately after they roll the dice. You wouldn't keep playing with them.
You'd pack up the board.
Yeah.
And that's what the U.S. is doing. They're just letting the kinetic pressure build. They're even dismissing media leaks about Russia supposedly helping Iran target U.S. troops.
Right. The administration firmly denies that those leaks reflect any real increased threat. But this pressure campaign is having ripple effects, like with the Houthis in the Red Sea.
Oh, yeah. The text argues the Houthis basically got suckered or snookered by the Iranians into attacking international shipping lanes.
Which is such a crazy backfire, because they ended up attacking Saudi and even Chinese-flagged ships, right? The exact countries Iran needs for economic survival.
Exactly. It just isolates them further.
But here's where I need you to help me synthesize this. If their military is truly reduced to Boston whalers, why does the official seem so convinced that the nuclear threat is still imminent?
Well, because in asymmetric warfare, Conventional military power and nuclear ambition they're on two totally different tracks.
Oh, so you don't need a huge navy to build a bomb.
Exactly. You don't need advanced fighter jets to enrich uranium in an underground bunker.
Huh.
The ideological desire for a weapon is the real threat here.
And the briefing definitely highlights that ideology. It literally calls Iran's leaders evil lunatics.
Yeah, stating they'd rather slaughter their own people than, make Iran the richest country in the Middle East. The ultimate goal is strict denuclearization. Not necessarily regime change, but no nukes.
Right. So while the Middle East is all about asymmetric pressure and taking down that shield, the briefing pivots to Europe, where there is no shield. It's
It's a horrifyingly conventional conflict, a massive industrial-scale war.
Yeah, the briefing describes Ukraine as a brutal meat grinder.
The sheer volume of mass being thrown into it is staggering. Russians are reportedly losing upwards of 5,000 to 6,000 soldiers a single week while taking strikes deep inside their own territory.
And there was one statistic that honestly just shocked me. The text says military officials can't recall another conflict where the killed in action rate is actually higher than the casualty rate.
Yes, that is a profound detail.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. What does that specific grim ratio tell us about the sheer brutality of how this war is being fought compared to, like, historical conflicts?
It tells us the logistics of survival have completely collapsed. Mechanically, you usually see 3 to 5 wounded for every soldier killed.
Because of body armor and medevacs?
Right. Rapid frontline triage usually keeps people alive. If the KIA rate is higher, it means those survivability factors are just gone.
Oh, wow. So if you get injured, there's no rescue.
Exactly. It points to relentless, saturated drone strikes and heavy artillery, where you can't extract the wounded, and injury just becomes a fatality.
That is incredibly grim. The U.S. ultimate goal, the text says, is for this senseless slaughter to end, for young Russians and Ukrainians to stop dying.
But getting to a deal requires mutual agreement, and that's where it's paralyzed. The briefing mentions previous deals that completely failed.
Right, the 3+2 plan and something called the trading of terror anchorage proposals. What were those?
So frameworks like 3+2 usually involve a nation getting security guarantees from allies in exchange for some territorial concessions. And the anchorage proposals were likely about trading port access or freezing naval hostilities.
But Ukraine found those totally unacceptable, which makes sense. You can't ask a sovereign country to just cede territory to stop the shooting.
Exactly. So the U.S. continues to provide arms through an initiative called Pearl, which the text notes is a NATO logistical pipeline.
Yeah.
But they need a new formula.
Which is a great transition to the next theme. In Ukraine, weapons and ammo are the currency of survival. But with U.S. allies, the currency is high-end technology.
Yes, moving from brute kinetic force to the leverage of technology and treaties. And the primary example here is Saudi Arabia.
Right. The U.S. Energy Department entered into a civil nuclear agreement with Saudi Arabia last November. And the rationale is so blunt.
Oh, incredibly blunt. The official essentially says the U.S. is not the only show in town, but we're the best show in town.
I mean, it's like franchising a restaurant. You give them your recipe for nuclear energy, but only so you retain the right to randomly inspect the kitchen.
That is exactly it. They're providing small, modular reactors because if the U.S. provides the tech, the U.S. controls the safeguards.
But even with safeguards, isn't exporting nuclear capabilities to the Middle East an inherently massive gamble?
It is a gamble. But strategically, it creates dependency. If Saudi Arabia buys from China or Russia, the U.S. is locked out. By doing it themselves, they tether Saudi Arabia to American fuel cycles and oversight.
That makes total sense. And we see this same control with Israel, right? Congress is debating fusing U.S. and Israeli military tech, like the Iron Dome.
Yeah, the official calls it standard co-production. But again, the U.S. maintains a strict veto over passing that tech to any third country.
Leverage.
Always leverage. And it extends to the Indo-Pacific. The U.S. is backing its treaty with the Philippines after China used water cannons on Philippine vessels near Scarborough Shoal.
A U.S. Coast Guard vessel even helped rescue an injured person there. It's a very physical display of standing by a treaty.
But the tech leverage with China isn't just about ships. The briefing mentions talks with Chinese official Wang Yi about global governance for artificial intelligence, which is fascinating, right? Two superpowers with huge military tension sitting down to discuss AI rules. Because rogue AI doesn't respect borders. It's a mutual threat.
So it forces diplomacy. Okay, so we have kinetic pressure in the Middle East, military aid in Europe, and tech leverage in Asia. But then we look at the Western Hemisphere.
And the strategy completely changes. It's all about waiting out the decay of isolated regimes.
Right. Looking at Cuba and Venezuela, the official actually claimed to be the main guy on Cuba policy, which is quite the title.
Yeah, and his assessment is that the Cuban regime is entirely incompetent. They want to fix the economy, but they're terrified of losing political control if they do.
And they don't have a sugar daddy anymore. They lost the free subsidies from the Soviets and then from Hugo Chavez. Now, the briefing says they're just freeloading with no sponsor.
They're economically starving themselves out. And with Venezuela, the U.S. is also playing a very long game.
Right. The text mentions an August transition, bridging an interim government and the 2015 National Assembly involving the opposition figure Maria Corina Machado.
But the official heavily emphasizes that transitions take immense patience. You cannot instantly turn a street protest movement into an electoral force.
So what does this all mean? How does a population practically transition from a protest movement into a functioning government when the infrastructure has been dismantled for, 25 years?
It's incredibly difficult. Protests mobilize people, but governing requires bureaucracy. You need a free press. You need independent vote counting.
You need safe ballot boxes that won't just get stolen by state police.
Exactly. You can't just snap your fingers and fix 25 years of hostility. It takes external facilitation and time.
It's just wild how different the timelines are, waiting decades in Cuba, but launching nightly strikes in the Red Sea. Executing all of this requires a very specific kind of administrative machinery.
And a total willingness to ignore international norms they don't agree with. The internal dynamics detailed in the text are very centralized.
Yeah, the official makes it clear that Donald J. Trump is the lead negotiator dictating the policy, supported by a really interesting team.
Right, Vice President Vance, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and coordination across the Departments of War, Treasury, and Energy.
It's very collaborative internally, though the official completely refused to answer any questions about a 2028 presidential run.
They kept the focus strictly on the current objectives. But the contrast is what's amazing. Internally collaborative, but externally fiercely combative, especially with the ICC.
Oh, the International Criminal Court. The official aggressively dismisses them, literally calling them lunatics and crazies.
Because the ICC tries to claim jurisdiction over non-treaty members, like the U.S. military or its presidents.
Right, and the U.S. is drawing a massive red line here, warning that there will be severe consequences if the ICC ignores them.
It just perfectly encapsulates the strategy. They love international cooperation when they hold the leverage, like with the Saudi deal, but they outright reject anybody that tries to impose rules on the U.S. without consent.
So to try and summarize this massive deep dive, the overarching worldview here is one of maximum kinetic pressure on active adversaries.
Right. Smashing the shield in Iran, supplying the meat grinder in Ukraine.
And leveraging high-tech tools to keep allies tethered, all while allowing isolated regimes like Cuba to just economically starve themselves out.
It is a very pragmatic, deeply transactional worldview.
And for you listening, whether you're taking notes for a class or just trying to figure out why the news feels so chaotic, understanding these specific strategic formulas really helps cut through the noise.
It really does. It shows the connective tissue between an AI meeting in China and a nuclear reactor in Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final lingering question to ponder. Something that builds on all this.
Oh, I like where this is going.
So if the primary tools of modern global statecraft are technological leverage, like the Saudi deal, and economic or military suffocation, like with Iran and Cuba,
Right.
what happens to global stability when an adversarial nation figures out how to become completely self-sufficient? If they become entirely immune to both our technology and our sanctions, how do we play the game when they don't need any of our pieces?
Wow. That is a terrifying but very necessary question.
Right. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the board, and we will catch you next time.